Hello, welcome back. This is the first of my series of what I would call movie ramblings. In some videos, I probably talk about general stuff, and then maybe do some reviews of some movies in future videos, as well as talk about directors, writers, artists, actors, all that stuff. Hopefully it will be fun to do and enjoyable for people to watch. But first and foremost, I can't wait to see The Man of Steel. Um, I try not to have super high expectations so that I won't be disappointed, but I am very excited and I definitely plan to go see that movie this Saturday. So hopefully I can do a review sometime next week, spoiler free, of what I think of that movie. As much of a comic book fan as I am, I would say that I am equally a big fan of good movie. It's a great form of entertainment, escapism. So as young as I could remember, I have always enjoyed movie. And you know, with comic books, as I mentioned in the previous few videos, I only had really two friends that I talk about comic books in 8th and ninth grade. And then after that, and even though I still collect for a decade after, I really didn't have any friends that collect comic books that I can chat with. I collected in college. Certainly my roommates know I collected and they saw me reading it, but not once did any of them bother to borrow a copy to read. So they were not interested and they didn't care that I like comic books. Not a big deal. But that basically go through the next many years. So, you understand, I started buying when I was in 1981 and all the way through to 2000 that I really didn't have that many friends that share that common interest in comic books. So in 2001, in early 2001, I met, I was hired for a position along with another person. We both were hired at the same time doing the same thing, the same job for different department for that company. And it was a new position, so basically we had to rely on each other to figure out what to do or how to meet the needs of the departments that we worked for. And it was a quick friendship with Rob. Um, you know, for the first time really in a long time, I found a friend that A, loved comic books, B, loved movies, sci-fi, you name it. He loved all form movies. So it was fantastic. It was a quick friendship from the start. We worked different departments, but we talked to each other daily to help solve the problem or any issue that we had at work while trying to solve problems for people in the departments that we work for. And we went to lunch every day and we talked about movies and comic books every day. It was awesome. And I had to thank him to turn me into the more adult title of DC. I was still basically a Marvel zombie predominantly up to this point. Outside of buying, like the Teen Titans stuff, some Swamp Thing stuff, and some of the New Adams stuff, I really didn't collect any other Teen Titan titles. Sure, I bought, Omega Man #1, a bunch of #1 issue that came out, through the 90s, as I would with every #1 issue. But as far as collecting, I didn't. So he was the one that turned me into reading, Sandman, Watchmen, all that title that was geared toward the adult readers. So I can thank him for that. But one thing for sure that I can thank him for is about movies. Up until that point, I love movies, but I really didn't know anything about everything else that involved in making a movie. Rob was a movie fanatic, even more so than a comic book fanatic. He know everything about everyone and every process that was put into making movies. You know, he can name off directors, producer, writers, everything. It's just about every movie. So, you know, I had no clue. You know, at that up until that point, you know, I mean, if you ask me who was a producer of Star Wars or who was the director of Star Wars or The Empire Strikes Back, I would be like, not sure. You know, I didn't pay attention to those little details. But he knows everything about movies, all the processes, and if there was a dream job for Rob, it would be involved in the movie industry in some capacity. But what he taught me was very interesting. That, you know, hopefully I can pass on some of the stuff I know, and it is interesting for other people. One of the biggest misconception about movies and how much money it can make, or what the profit of a movie is really unknown to a lot of people. But you know, the general rule of thumb, okay, for a movie is, if a movie costs $100 million to make, the average take of the movie company, the studio, compared to the gross ticket sales at the window when you go see a movie, is about 50%. So let's say a movie costs $100 million to make, it would need to sell at least $200 million in ticket sales to break even. Okay, so on top of that, when a movie is distributed overseas to, you know, any other country, the margin is actually squeezed down to as low as like 25%, because, you know, once you have to deal with other distributor to, you know, sponsor your movie overseas, you have to pay that guy a fair share too. So at the end of the day, the margin overseas is anywhere from 25 to 35% on the average, because you have to understand, sure, some place like, you know, you bring a movie to England, there's no extra cost really, but when you bring a movie to, say, Japan or China, then it requires a lot of extra cost to, you know, dub the voice as well as put in subtitle if needed. You know, there's a lot of extra little things that take times to put a movie out overseas, on top of different reasons that delay the process. For example, for the longest time I was so confused of, you know, gee, you know, if a movie is released, why don't they release it worldwide? Well, part of the reason is the dubbing and subtitling of some movies that's needed. So, you know, let's see, but right now, for example, Star Trek has been out for a couple weeks, but it won't be released in Japan, for example, until the first week of August, I believe, because, you know, it just takes longer to get the movie ready to do subtitle for Japan. There are plenty of Japanese people that can understand English, but that's not the point. You know, they need to do that. So, you know, when you see a movie like Star Trek, for example, and it costs, let's say, $150 million to make, it would need to gross, you know, at least 300 million and more, because let's say if the split was they gross $150 million in US ticket, that means that they only get to keep, the studio only get to keep 75 millions of that proceeds. So if it costs $150 million to make, they only halfway there. So they need to man up on the foreign market of at least $200 or $300 million more in gross ticket sales, so that they can get, maybe $75 million more. On top of that, you gotta understand, there's much more revenue to the studios when it comes down to pay-per-views, DVD sales, all that stuff. So there's more to it, but as you know, it takes from the time the movie is released until the pay-per-views and the DVD sales, it could be 3 to 6 months. So the studio would have to wait, a good maybe 3 to 6 months sometimes to even make a nickel on a movie that grossed $300 million. Thankfully, as you and I all know, a movie now can go from big blockbuster on screen to DVD in 5 months sometime. So the lag time is much shorter. Years ago, for the youngster out there that don't know, sometimes it takes a year for a movie to hit the DVD. So it's a different world now as far as how quickly a movie go from being on the screen to being on pay-per-view and DVD. It's amazing. The world has changed a lot, but at least now you understand the makeup of the money that involved in how much the movie need to make. So if the Superman movie costs $200 million to make, okay, it's gonna need to do $400 million to $500 million minimum to break even. So Rob give me a lot of education behind the scene on how a movie is made, what is needed to get a movie to be made, all that stuff. And one thing about Rob is I only worked with him for about a year, but we were the best of friends at that moment in time. Sadly, in 2003, he moved to New York.